Racist police beat black man with baton, then a powerful figure appears. Sarkis walked along the quiet street with a plastic grocery bag in his hand. The night was cool, and the soft yellow glow from the street lamps lit his way. He had just finished a long shift at the warehouse and decided to pick up some groceries for his mother before heading home. The bag held bread, milk, and a few apples she liked. He thought about how tired she must be after a full day and how she always waited up for him no matter how late it was. His steps were slow but steady, and though he was tired, he felt proud that he was helping his family. The streets were nearly empty, except for a couple of cars driving by now and then. Marcus shoved his free hand into his jacket pocket and hummed softly to himself. But then, suddenly, the sound of tires screeching broke the silence. A police car turned sharply and pulled up beside him. Its bright headlights flooded the sidewalk, making him squint. The siren wasn't on, but the sharp beam of light felt more threatening than any noise. Two officers stepped out. One was tall, with a cold expression, and the other was shorter but had a harsh, impatient look on his face. Their footsteps were heavy on the pavement. "Hey, you there," the taller one shouted, his voice cutting through the night air. Marcus froze, unsure why he was being stopped. "Yes, officer." Marcus asked politely, shifting the bag in his hand so it wouldn't slip. "What are you doing out here at this hour?" the shorter officer barked. His tone carried suspicion, not concern. Marcus explained softly, "I just finished work, sir. I picked up some groceries for my mom. I live a few blocks away." He raised the bag slightly to show them. But instead of easing their doubts, the gesture seemed to irritate them more. "Don't play smart with us," the tall officer said, moving closer. "Let's see some ID." Marcus quickly nodded and pulled his wallet out of his back pocket. He handed over his ID with careful, steady hands. His heart raced, not because he had done anything wrong, but because of the sharp stares fixed on him. The taller officer snatched the ID, studied it briefly, then scoffed as if unimpressed. "What are you hiding?" the shorter one asked suddenly. "Empty your pockets." Marcus blinked in surprise. "Sir, I don't have anything. Just my keys and my phone." "Do it," the officer snapped. Marcus slowly emptied his pockets, showing only his phone and keys. He tried to stay calm, but he could feel the unease growing in his chest. The officers exchanged glances, their suspicion not fading. One of them pushed the grocery bag aside with his foot, making the apples roll onto the ground. The sound of fruit hitting the pavement echoed loudly in the still night. Marcus bent down quickly to pick them up, but the officer shouted, "Stay still." The command made him freeze mid-movement. His hands hovered in the air. The atmosphere was heavy, like a storm about to break. Across the street, a couple walking home noticed what was happening. They stopped, whispering to each other, concern flashing in their eyes. Soon, others began to slow down, pulling out their phones. A delivery driver paused his bike, watching silently. One woman pressed record on her phone camera, pointing it toward the scene. Marcus felt all the eyes on him, but none of them gave him comfort. He wished he could disappear, wished he could just walk the rest of the way home in peace. The tall officer stepped closer, his hand resting on his baton. "You look nervous," he said with a smirk. "I'm just tired, sir," Marcus replied quietly. "Or maybe you're hiding something," the shorter one shot back. Marcus's throat felt dry. He wanted to explain again that he had nothing, that he was only walking home. But before he could speak, the tall officer shoved him lightly against the wall. "Hands where I can see them," he ordered. Marcus raised his hands, the bag of groceries slipping from his grasp. The milk carton burst open on the ground, spreading across the pavement. The crowd gasped softly, the sound of phones recording getting clearer. Marcus's mind raced. He thought of his mother waiting at home, probably sipping tea and glancing at the clock, wondering why he was late. He thought of how she always told him to keep his head down, to stay polite no matter what. So he stayed still, raising his hands higher, though his heart pounded painfully. The short officer circled him like a predator. "You fit the description," he muttered. "What description?" Marcus asked carefully, his voice trembling. The officer didn't answer. Instead, he tapped his baton against his palm. The sound made Marcus shiver. The crowd's whispers grew louder. Some shouted, "He didn't do anything." But the officers ignored them, their focus locked on Marcus. He realized in that moment that no amount of politeness or patience could change their perception of him. To them, he was already guilty of something he hadn't done. His chest tightened as he stood there, his groceries ruined on the ground, the lights glaring in his eyes, and the crowd watching every second of his humiliation. And though he didn't yet know it, this was only the beginning of a night that would change not just his life, but the lives of everyone standing there, watching the scene unfold. Marcus stood frozen against the wall, the cold concrete pressing into his back, while the bright flashlight beam stung his eyes. His groceries lay scattered across the pavement, milk soaking into the cracks, apples rolling toward the gutter. He wished he could pick them up, but he dared not move. The short officer stepped closer, gripping his baton, while the taller one scanned the small crowd that had gathered. Their faces were stern, almost daring anyone to step forward. "Why do you look so nervous?" the tall officer asked again, his tone mocking, as if Marcus's fear was proof of guilt. "I'm just tired, sir." "I told you, I was coming home from work," Marcus replied, his voice low but steady. He wanted to sound respectful, but his words shook ever so slightly. The short officer leaned forward. "I don't buy it. Guys like you are always up to something." Marcus swallowed hard. "I don't have anything. You can check me." That simple sentence seemed to set the officers off even more. The shorter one grabbed Marcus by the arm and twisted it behind his back, forcing him to bend slightly. Marcus winced but didn't resist. He knew better than to fight. The tall officer pulled out the baton and tapped it against Marcus's side, a quiet but threatening rhythm. From the crowd, voices grew louder. "Hey, he didn't do anything," one young man shouted. Another person called out, "Leave him alone." The officers pretended not to hear, focusing only on Marcus. The phones in the crowd stayed raised, little red recording lights flashing in the darkness. The short officer sneered. "Where's the stuff? You hiding it at your mom's house?" "I don't have anything," Marcus repeated, his chest tightening. Suddenly, without warning, the tall officer pushed the baton into Marcus's ribs. Not a full strike, but enough to make him stumble sideways. The crowd gasped. Marcus caught himself against the wall, breathing heavily, trying to stay calm. He wanted to scream, to fight back, but he thought of his mother's face, her gentle voice telling him to always keep calm no matter what. The short officer barked, "Get on the ground." Marcus hesitated. "Sir, please, I haven't done anything." That was enough. The tall officer shoved him hard, and Marcus stumbled down, landing on his knees. The shorter one pressed his hand on Marcus's shoulder, pushing him lower. The baton came down, not a wild swing, but a deliberate strike to Marcus's arm. Pain shot through him, and he cried out, clutching his elbow. The crowd roared with anger. "Stop! Stop hitting him," someone shouted. A woman's voice cracked, "He's just a kid." Another yelled, "We're recording everything." But the officers kept pressing. The tall one raised the baton again, while the short one pinned Marcus to the pavement. The smell of spilled milk mixed with the cold night air, and Marcus's cheek pressed against the wet ground. His shirt grew damp, but he couldn't focus on that. His arm throbbed, his chest heaved, and his heart pounded with both fear and helpless rage. The baton struck again, this time on his shoulder. Marcus groaned, tears springing to his eyes not just from pain, but from the deep humiliation of being treated like a criminal in front of strangers. He could hear the clicks of phone cameras, the angry murmurs of the crowd, the rush of cars slowing down to see what was happening. One voice in the crowd shouted louder than the others, "You're going to regret this." Everyone's watching. The tall officer glanced briefly at the crowd, his face tense. He knew the cameras were on him, but his pride didn't let him back down. Instead, he barked, "Step back. This is police business." The short officer pressed Marcus harder into the ground. "Stop resisting," he shouted, even though Marcus wasn't moving at all. He lay still, trying to breathe, trying to hold back the cries of pain, knowing that any sound could be twisted as defiance. The baton lifted again. Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for another blow. His groceries were ruined, his pride was crushed, and his body ached. The night that had begun as a simple walk home had turned into a nightmare. But just as the baton hovered in the air, ready to strike again, a new sound cut through the chaos. Tires screeched at the end of the block. The crowd turned their heads. A sleek black SUV pulled up sharply, its engine rumbling. The tinted windows glimmered under the streetlights. The baton froze midair as the tall officer noticed the car. The door opened slowly, and a tall figure in a dark suit stepped out. The street seemed to grow quieter as people recognized who it was. Whispers moved through the crowd like a wave. Some lowered their phones just slightly, their eyes wide with shock. The officers hesitated, their grip on Marcus loosening for the first time. Marcus lifted his head weakly, his cheek still pressed to the damp pavement. Through blurred eyes, he saw polished shoes step into the light, and then the calm but powerful presence of a man everyone in the city knew. The crowd murmured, "That's him, oh my God, it's Judge Harris," and in that instant, everything began to change. The crowd grew silent as the tall man stepped out of the sleek black SUV. His presence seemed to shift the air itself. Even the officers who had been so aggressive a moment ago faltered. Their baton and harsh words suddenly looked small compared to the authority standing before them. Judge Anthony Harris was not just another man in a suit. He was a respected civil rights attorney, a judge, and a community leader known across the city. People in power either admired him or feared him, and ordinary citizens trusted him like a guardian of fairness. Judge Harris walked with calm, measured steps toward the scene. His eyes, sharp but steady, moved from the injured young man on the ground to the officers standing over him. He didn't raise his voice, but his tone carried a weight that made the entire block listen. "That's enough," he said firmly. The baton lowered slightly. The shorter officer stiffened, gripping Marcus's shoulder a little less tightly. The tall officer looked unsettled but didn't immediately step back. "This is police business," he muttered, trying to sound confident, but his voice wavered under the judge's stare. Judge Harris ignored the excuse and crouched down beside Marcus. "Son, are you hurt?" His voice softened as he extended a hand. Marcus, still trembling, looked up at him with a mix of relief and disbelief. Slowly, he reached out and allowed the judge to help him sit up. The crowd murmured, some whispering in awe, others cheering quietly under their breath. The judge turned his head slightly toward the officers, his eyes narrowing. "What's this man's crime?" The tall officer cleared his throat. "Suspicious behavior." "He's suspicious behavior." Judge Harris interrupted, his voice sharp now. "Carrying groceries home for his mother is suspicious behavior." His words rang out like a gavel strike. The crowd erupted in agreement, voices rising louder now. "Exactly," someone shouted. "He didn't do anything," another added. The judge stood tall again, adjusting his suit jacket with deliberate calm. "Badge numbers," he demanded. His hand extended firmly toward the officers. The shorter officer hesitated. "Sir, with all due respect, badge numbers," Judge Harris repeated, his tone unyielding. The crowd pulled closer, phones recording every second. The officers knew this moment was being documented from every angle. With visible reluctance, both slowly recited their badge numbers, which several bystanders shouted back for confirmation as they captured them on video. Marcus tried to steady his breathing, clutching his sore arm. He could hardly believe what was happening. Just moments ago, he had felt powerless, crushed under fear and humiliation. Now, someone with immense influence stood at his side, defending him openly. Judge Harris placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You're not alone in this. We'll make sure justice is served." His voice was steady, filled with conviction. The officers shifted uncomfortably. Their authority, once absolute, now felt like sand slipping through their fingers. The judge's presence had turned the crowd into witnesses not of a helpless act of abuse, but of accountability in action. "Call for medical assistance," Judge Harris instructed one of the officers, his tone leaving no room for argument. For a moment, the officers hesitated, but then the taller one reluctantly reached for his radio, reporting the need for an ambulance. The crowd erupted into cheers, clapping, and shouting words of encouragement toward Marcus. The delivery driver raised his fist in solidarity. The young woman recording from across the street wiped tears from her eyes. Marcus looked around at the sea of faces, strangers who had stood powerless minutes ago but now seemed united, encouraged by the courage of one man who had the strength to stand against injustice. Judge Harris then addressed the crowd directly. "Don't stop recording. Don't ever stop holding people accountable. The truth must be seen." His words rang like a sermon, and the people listened. The officers avoided his gaze, their posture stiff. They knew their careers, their reputations, and perhaps their freedom now hung in the balance. The flashing lights of the ambulance began to appear down the street, reflecting off the wet pavement where Marcus's milk had spilled. The night no longer felt like just another silent city evening, it felt like a turning point. And in the middle of it all stood Marcus, bruised but not broken, next to a man whose presence had changed everything. But deep in his chest, Marcus wondered, was this the end of his nightmare, or just the beginning of a fight much bigger than himself? Marcus leaned against the wall, his body sore, but for the first time that night he felt a weight lifting off his chest. Judge Harris had not only stopped the officers, he had shifted the entire mood of the street. The crowd that once stood helpless now buzzed with energy and confidence. Phones stayed raised high, capturing every moment. People whispered, some even cheered softly, knowing this was history happening before their eyes. Judge Harris bent down slightly, speaking to Marcus with kindness. "Hold on, son. Help is coming. You're safe now." His voice, calm yet strong, was like a steady anchor in the storm. Marcus nodded weakly, clutching his sore arm, the throbbing pain mixing with a strange new feeling of relief. The ambulance pulled up, its flashing red and blue lights bouncing across the walls and faces of everyone there. Two paramedics rushed out with a stretcher. The taller officer instinctively stepped forward as if to control the scene, but Judge Harris lifted his hand sharply. "Stand down. You've done enough." His words cut through the night, and the officer froze, his authority gone. The paramedics knelt beside Marcus, checking his breathing and examining his bruises. "He's in pain, but stable," one of them said. They carefully helped him onto the stretcher. As they secured him, Marcus looked at Judge Harris with wide, grateful eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. Judge Harris leaned close and replied, "Don't thank me yet. The fight isn't over. But you won't be alone." Turning to the officers, Judge Harris's voice hardened. "You've crossed a line tonight. Not only did you harm an innocent man, but you did it under the watch of dozens of cameras. Your actions will not disappear in the dark. They will be seen in the light of justice." The crowd cheered, their voices ringing louder now. Some clapped, others shouted words of encouragement. "Yes. That's right. Justice. The energy was electric, a wave of unity sweeping through strangers who had come together by chance but now stood as witnesses of truth. The officers tried to defend themselves. The shorter one stammered, he wasn't cooperating. Judge Harris cut him off immediately. I watched him cooperate. I heard his words. He begged you to listen, and you chose to ignore him. Don't insult this community by twisting the truth. The taller officer clenched his jaw, but he didn't argue further. The power he once held over Marcus had vanished, replaced by the weight of accountability. Judge Harris turned back to the crowd. His voice rose, calm but commanding. This is why we must never stay silent. This young man could have been broken tonight, his voice silenced forever. But because you recorded, because you stood here, his truth will be heard. Let this be a lesson: justice only survives when good people refuse to look away. The cheers grew louder. Phones zoomed in closer. The delivery driver, who had been watching quietly, raised his voice, "We're with you, Judge." Others echoed, "We're with you." The street that had once echoed with fear now shook with hope. Marcus, lying on the stretcher, felt tears well in his eyes, not only from the pain but from the power of the moment. He realized he was no longer just a victim. He had become a symbol, and Judge Harris had turned his suffering into something larger than himself. As the paramedics lifted the stretcher into the ambulance, Judge Harris followed. He paused at the door and looked back at the officers one last time. "Every action has consequences," he said firmly. "And yours will arrive soon." The crowd erupted again, their voices carrying down the block as the ambulance doors closed. Marcus, through the small window, caught one last glimpse of the judge standing tall among the people, his presence like a shield against injustice. Inside the ambulance, Marcus lay back, exhausted but strangely hopeful. The siren wailed softly as the vehicle pulled away, but in his mind, the louder sound was the chanting of the crowd, the voices that reminded him he wasn't alone. For the first time that night, Marcus closed his eyes, not in fear, but in the comfort of knowing someone powerful had stood for him and that this night would not be forgotten. The following days after the incident felt like a storm sweeping through the entire city. What had happened on that quiet street did not stay hidden, it spread everywhere. The videos recorded by bystanders were uploaded within hours, and by morning, millions of people had seen them. News anchors replayed the footage on television, social media was filled with angry voices, and hashtags calling for justice trended across platforms. Marcus sat in a hospital bed with his arm in a sling. His body still ached, but what weighed on him more was the thought of how his life had changed in a single night. His mother sat beside him, holding his hand, tears streaming down her face, not only from fear but also from pride. "You didn't deserve this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But maybe God allowed this so the truth could come out." Judge Harris visited the hospital later that day. When he walked into the room, Marcus felt a rush of gratitude. The judge pulled up a chair and spoke gently. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," Marcus replied softly. "Hurts a little. But I can't believe everything that's happening." Judge Harris nodded. "It's bigger than you now. That night wasn't just about one young man. It's about everyone who's been silenced before. The world saw it, and now there must be accountability." True to his words, the city mayor announced a full investigation into the officers. The police department suspended both men, and hearings were scheduled. Journalists crowded outside the hospital, hoping to speak to Marcus. He wasn't used to attention, but Judge Harris guided him carefully, ensuring he wasn't overwhelmed. "We'll move at your pace," the judge promised. Within days, rallies filled the streets. People marched carrying signs with Marcus's name. Some read, "Justice for Marcus," while others simply carried the message, "Stop the violence." Strangers Marcus had never met chanted his name in unison, turning his pain into a movement. Marcus himself struggled with conflicting feelings. Part of him wanted to return to his quiet life, to go back to working shifts and caring for his mother without the eyes of the world on him. Another part of him knew he had been given a role he could not ignore. "What if I'm not strong enough?" he asked Judge Harris one evening. The judge placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Strength isn't about not feeling fear. It's about standing up even when you are afraid. And you've already shown strength." The trial weeks later was broadcast live. Judge Harris represented Marcus personally, standing tall in the courtroom, laying out the facts with unshakable clarity. The videos played on large screens, showing every moment of the officer's actions. The silence in the courtroom was heavy as the truth unfolded in undeniable detail. The officers tried to defend themselves, but their words sounded empty against the evidence. Witnesses from the crowd testified, describing how Marcus had been calm and respectful the entire time. Tears ran down some faces as they relived the night. Marcus sat quietly, his heart racing, but every time he looked at Judge Harris, he felt a sense of calm. He wasn't alone. When the verdict was read guilty on multiple counts of misconduct and assault, the courtroom erupted with gasps and applause. Justice had been served, at least in this case. Marcus's life was never the same. He received invitations to speak at schools and community events. He was nervous at first, but he found courage in sharing his story. "I was just a man walking home," he told one audience. "It could have been anyone. But I learned that when people come together, when truth is spoken loudly enough, change can begin." Judge Harris stood by him through it all, guiding him, mentoring him, and reminding him that his story was part of a much larger journey. The story closed not with Marcus broken, but with Marcus rising, his pain transformed into purpose. The night that could have ended in silence instead became a voice that echoed across the city, inspiring others to believe that justice was possible. And as Judge Harris often said whenever he addressed the people, power is not about the force in your hands. Real power is standing for truth, even when the world wants you silent.